All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and we are back with some more really strong, powerful decks that I think are kind of on the rise right now. The mini set ED Crisis has only been out for a couple of days. Yesterday, I gave what I believed were the best decks to play in Ranked at that time. However, things are changing so quickly. I believe there are several other decks that are actually kind of at the top. I've been playing in Master Ball rank in the top, 200-300 for the last couple of hours, and there's a lot of really strong decks. Also, a couple of tournaments happened just in the last day. So again, things are changing super rapidly. We're gonna do a service to you guys here on the channel. I do my best to just go ahead and keep you guys up to date on, what decks are really good and what decks people are playing. So yes, we did yesterday talk about the best decks for Ranked, and hopefully all of the people that watched yesterday's video also watch today's video, because this is kind of part 2 for that. I do think a lot of the decks that we talked about yesterday are still kind of the best decks, but there is a couple of new inclusions. The first one, of course, is going to be on the screen right now, so this is really interesting. Let's get right into it, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay tuned. Videos coming all over the place here on the channel. You're not going to want to miss it. And yeah, you're going to want to stay up to date, right? So here you go. Okay, the first deck we're going to take a look at is actually Solgaleo. So this particular deck I've been seeing all over the place. And this is a deck that I think is kind of here predominantly to counter Silvally and Rampardos. That's sort of what we're seeing in the format right now, at least at the top of the Master Ball metagame right now, is that, Silvally and Rampardos really kind of dominated. It had like a 50-50 matchup against Buzzwole, but was doing really good against all of the decks that wasn't Buzzwole. So what people saw, or what people kind of started to do, was develop ways to kind of counteract Silvally Rampardos, because it was so common. One of the new decks that actually just is really good overall, but particularly good against Silvally and Rampardos in my mind, is going to be this new Solgaleo deck. So Solgaleo last format with Skarmory really wasn't well positioned, and it wasn't a deck list that did very well, even though it was actually the most common deck throughout ranked battles last season. I think that this particular Solgaleo deck is actually a lot better than the previous one, and it is going to be utilizing the new Shiinotic card, or Shiinotic. I'm terrible with pronouncing the names. I know the Pokemon, I just can't say the names, but the new Shiinotic, or Shiinotic? I don't know, man. I really don't. This particular little mushroom guy is actually quite good with Solgaleo. So it's got the Illuminate ability, 2 colorless energy in the attack cost. However, we're not really attacking with it. Basically, this thing here is able to search any Pokemon from your deck. And that's it. That's really all the ability does. But the whole idea with this deck is to get into Solgaleo as consistently as possible, since Solgaleo can come in and retreat for free, and it also has a low energy attack cost, and also can KO things like Silvally. It's actually just quite good, realistically, in this particular matchup. Also, like, if Rampardos does end up KOing one of your other Pokemon, it drops down in HP. Solgaleo with Lily is kind of enough, honestly, to just sort of survive a couple of attacks, especially from Silvally or Type Null. It's realistically just a really strong deck that is all about consistently getting into your Solgaleos, and that's what Shiinotic is really all about. So this deck list is actually really good. This particular Shiinotic card, I think, is a really, it's a polarizing card in my mind, because I never really thought it would see that much play, because it's just, the downside to the deck is hard to justify why we would play it. But I think in a scenario like this, where the Pokemon that we're eventually getting into is a very strong, high HP Pokemon that has a low energy attack cost. So again, the whole idea with the deck is that we kind of just stall out, and we utilize Shiinotic to basically thin out the deck and guarantee that at some point in turn 3 or turn 4, we can go into Solgaleo, and then just start kind of attacking our opponent turn after turn after turn, potentially even going into a second Solgaleo later on. So this deck list doesn't seem like it would be that good or make much sense, but for whatever the reason, it actually just ends up being quite good. Again, we have Lily, we have Red. You could also perhaps play more hand disruption, which again is probably going to be pretty good against Silvally, also pretty good against Buzzwole for sure, but also at the same time, Solgaleo does pretty good against Buzzwole as well, so you get to keep that in mind. Red plus the 120 is kind of enough to KO Buzzwole, so 120 is also a pretty decent number right now. You can KO Celesteela and against Silvally, so yeah, Solgaleo is kind of on the rise. I've been seeing this deck all over the place, so this was sort of the main inspiration as to why I wanted to make this video, because again, at the top of the ranked battles meta right now, this deck is kind of popping off, and hopefully it does well in tournaments as well, but it really is kind of a specific meta call to this Silvally Rampardos deck, which is just kind of running wild right now. So I think a lot of people in Pokemon Pocket in the community are kind of trying to find good counterplay to it. This ends up being actually a fairly good option. In my mind, it's actually the best way to play Solgaleo, at least for right now. I don't think Skarmory's that bad, but anyway, here's a new kind of updated Solgaleo deck that is just honestly really, really quite good. The other deck I will say that we're not actually going to talk about in today's video, but it's because we talk about it all the time, is Giratina and Darkrai. So if we're taking a look at decks that are both good against, the field in general, but particularly Silvally Rampardos, playing Giratina and Darkrai is actually a pretty good option. That deck is just super consistent and flexible, all basic Pokemon. So if you're playing Giratina Darkrai, you can play a couple copies of Mars, maybe Red Card, you could play a couple Rocky Helmets, you could play Pokemon Center Lady. That deck honestly does fairly well against Silvally as well. So keep that in mind. If you're running into a bunch of Rampardos Silvally, this Solgaleo deck is a decent option. Of course, Buzzwole is still a strong deck. And then I think that just playing, maximum hand disruption Giratina Darkrai is also actually a pretty good, choice, I should say. Okay, let's move on to some other decks that are a little bit more niche, but also quite strong. And again, just sort of new approaches to, some other archetypes that maybe were common at some point in Pokemon Pocket over the last meta. And this is going to be just an updated Electro-type deck. We did take a look at Tapu Koko with Oricorio and Zeraora, but this deck is predominantly just utilizing Magnezone. And again, Magnezone is actually a fairly good Pokemon in this particular metagame. With Giant Cape, yes, we are actually going up to 160 HP, and then we should be living a hit from Rampardos, which is definitely fairly relevant. Also, we are KOing Silvally, but in general, I think Magnezone is still a good Pokemon in the format. This thing can just, do what it does. I don't know exactly how to describe Magnezone other than the fact that it's got a good amount of HP and it does a good amount of damage, and it's just a consistent Pokemon. So this is more of a single prized archetype focused, Electro-type deck, but I've seen people play Magnezone in a variety of different ways, and I still think it's actually pretty good in the format. Again, with Giant Cape, we do live a hit from Rampardos, which is fairly relevant, but also we can force Rampardos to just sort of KO our Tapu Koko or an Oricorio or a Zeraora or even our first Magnezone, and then it should drop an HP and then we can KO it, right? So Magnezone is just a really strong option in general, and I think it'll continue to be because it's so consistent. It's got a lot of HP and it just sort of sets itself up really nicely. So yeah, here's Magnezone. I've seen some people play Magnezone with Giratina and Tapu Lele like they were last format. I still think that could actually end up being a really, really strong archetype in this format, right? I mean, Giratina Tapu Lele is always going to be pretty good, and I think that Magnezone fits with that archetype quite nicely. So I know a lot of people want to play the new cards when the set comes out, so this is going to be a Magnezone deck that is kind of utilizing some of the new cards like Zeraora, like Tapu Koko. But either way, Electrical Core does kind of give us a little bit more flexibility, allowing us to kind of go into our second Pokemon just much easier. A little bit of hand disruption for sure. We also play Iono and Lily, particularly to heal up that Magnezone, which is actually somewhat relevant. So you got to keep in mind that in the format right now, hand disruption definitely feels quite good. Any deck list that can kind of squeeze some hand disruption into it is probably going to have some type of an advantage. This is a really, really interesting deck. I think that incorporates all of the new Electro-type Pokemon, but yeah, I think that Magnezone is still quite good. So for the people that were kind of looking to play Electro-type but wanted to play Magnezone, this might be our best option. We saw Magnezone and Oricorio last format, and we saw Magnezone Giratina last format, and then in the first couple of days of this new format, we've seen these Tapu Koko decks. So we're kind of mashing those two together, and it's a deck that honestly can perform quite well, and, it all kind of melds together really well. I think that the Electro-type in general is really interesting right now. There's just a lot of really decent strategies in Pokemon that don't necessarily, need to go together, but they all can go together because they all just independently work on their own. Oricorio certainly is going to win you games sometimes. Zeraora for that extra energy can be clutch. Even though we're not actually playing Dawn, it doesn't really matter because Zeraora is just sort of a leadoff option that allows us to attack for 50 damage on that second turn. So it's honestly not that bad. And yeah, Magnezone is Magnezone. It's going to be around for hopefully a while. I think that this card is actually just really strong and kind of good for the metagame in a variety of different ways. So you can go like 3 or 4 different directions with this deck, but they're all decent decks. So, or all decent Pokemon. And like I said, they all kind of meld together really well. So here you go. There's Magnezone, Electro-type Magnezone. All right, next up is going to be a Buzzwole deck that is a little bit different than the one we saw previously. This has seen a little bit of play in competitive. Also, I've seen it in ranked battles a little bit. It's a very interesting deck that kind of utilizes the ability to attack for only 2 energies with Buzzwole. That's really what this comes down to. We can also attack for 2 energies with Celesteela because actually, never mind. It's grass energy to grass Pokemon. So you have to get 3 energies on Celesteela, but we aren't actually playing, Lucamine is what it's called, right? So because technically speaking, with Rare Candy going into Serperior, we don't actually need 3 energies to attack with Buzzwole. We don't really need Lucamine because 2 energies is just much easier to obtain than 3. And that's really all it comes down to, right? We still have the Celesteela to double pivot out. Serperior as well, I think should allow, like, so it counts for retreat cost as well, right? Because the energies count as 2, right? So I believe that's how Serperior works. I could be completely wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure because the energies count as 2, that means that in your retreat class, you can just retreat for 1 energy technically. That I could be completely off by that, but for some reason, I'm thinking that's the case. You guys should correct me in the comment section below. Either way, we have 2 Celesteelas, so Serperior in its own right can attack for 2 energies, which is, again, fairly decent, even though it only has 110 HP. You are living attack from, of course, Silvally, right? That hits for 100. So it's not terrible. We can utilize Leaf Cape and Erika's and just have a couple of different attacking Pokemon. It's a different flavor of the Buzzwole decks, and I don't know if this is necessarily a better version of course, like playing Kartana or Pheromosa and Lusamine, things like that. But I actually think that this deck has quite a bit of merit, and realistically, when you're focusing a little bit more on Buzzwole and only able you're able to attack for only 2 energies, it's actually a little bit like kind of broken. I don't know how else to describe it. I tried a couple of games with this, not in ranked battles, but in just sort of the normal mode. And this deck actually just works a lot better than you would think for whatever the reason. Honestly, I don't know how to describe it. Just a fairly decent Pokemon. And like I said, we could potentially force our opponent to go through Celesteela and Serperior and then go through Buzzwole. Buzzwole as well is able to hit for weakness on Rampardos. However, of course, even with weakness, we don't hit for 150. So you might justify playing something like a Beastite still in the deck, or also maybe justify playing just a copy of Giovanni to KO the Rampardos decks. But yeah, it's really quite good. I do like Buzzwole. One thing I will say though is that I think recently, or just in the last day or so, what I've seen a lot from the Silvally Rampardos decks is that they started playing Giovanni in their deck, or even a copy of Red, to basically get the one-hit KO on Buzzwole. So it's a little bit difficult. That's why I think we're a bit reliant on the Leaf Capes now. But Leaf Cape with Buzzwole is proving to be super strong. It basically allows you to live a variety of different attacks, basically every attack in the game at 170 HP, and we do hit for weakness on things like Darkrai still. So our matchup against Giratina Darkrai should be pretty good as well. And yeah, here it is. So if you have Buzzwole and Celesteela, but maybe you don't have Pheromosa or Kartana, or if you wanted to play just a little bit of a spicy Buzzwole deck that was just a little bit different than like the normal that a lot of people are playing, I guess, this is, kind of the alternate option. So again, I don't know if this is going to be better than the, the other version with Lusamine and Kartana and Pheromosa, but it is pretty strong, a lot stronger than anyone might think. So, yeah, here it is, Serperior and Buzzwole. An interesting combination. You wouldn't think that it really makes a whole lot of sense, but Serperior in its own right is actually a fairly strong Pokemon. So, being able to attack for 2 energies with Buzzwole just happens to be kind of broken. So, there you go. Yeah, we're playing Guzma as well. I think Guzma's also pretty relevant. There's just a lot of scenarios, I think, right now where opponents are probably also playing Leaf Cape if you're playing a grass deck, but even Giratina Darkrai plays Rocky Helmets and Giant Cape is everywhere. It's just a really good card. I would recommend playing Guzma in a lot of decks, but at the same time, maybe you want to slot in some hand disruption, particularly for those Silvally Rampardos decks. That's sort of my main thing right now, is that one of the main counters that we're seeing to Silvally Rampardos and a lot of decks in the format is hand disruption. So if you can squeeze it in, maybe you should go ahead and try to do that. All right, next up is a deck that, again, I don't know if is going to ever be like super high meta, but this is going to be Blacephalon. So I haven't actually really covered Blacephalon much yet on the channel. This seems to be kind of a common way that people are playing it. I wish there was a little bit more of a concrete way to play Blacephalon. Unfortunately, when you lead off with it, it just doesn't feel very good because you oftentimes get KO'd before you can attack with Beat Punk. But we're actually playing it with Turtonator and Oricorio. And Oricorio is actually a really interesting starting Pokemon. And it kind of bodes well with Lusamine because it kind of does a decent amount of chip damage, but it discards. So what Kindle does on Oricorio, if you don't know, this is a pretty obscure Pokemon. For 2 energies, we do 40 damage as a basic Pokemon, 70 HP, but we discard a random energy from both of the Pokemon, right? One from Oricorio and then one from your opponent's active Pokemon. So it can actually work as like a stalling mechanic while getting energies in your discard pile to then use Lusamine and go into Blacephalon. At the same time as well, like we have the Turtonator Kiawe core as a leadoff, which is probably our preferred leadoff option. But again, the deck has some inconsistencies because if we lead off with Blacephalon, there's really just not much we can do. We are playing 1 copy of Leaf, but again, this deck has some inherent inconsistencies. Blacephalon is a card that is actually really good against basically every deck that isn't a single prize archetype. And that's really what Blacephalon comes down to. And that's kind of the build for the deck, right? So it's kind of an all or nothing card that is basically there to just kind of take KOs on these large Pokemon that are worth more than 1 prize, right? But there's several decks in the format that play Pokemon that are worth less than 2 prizes, right? Just single prize Pokemon that are strong. Rampardos, Silvally, Magnezone, just a variety of them. So Blacephalon can feel kind of bad into those particular matchups, which, you know, does sort of, you know, kind of drop the, I guess, the overall kind of matchup spread for this deck. But if you're going against a Giratina Darkrai or a Buzzwole deck, or really any deck that's playing EX Pokemon, Blacephalon can kind of just KO them, right? So it's really cool to be able to set up Blacephalon in one turn and then just kind of KOs. It really is a little bit kind of broken. Specifically a strong counterplay to the grass decks, but in general, I think Blacephalon's a little bit slept on. I don't know if it'll really ever kind of pick up in popularity a ton, but for the people that wanted to play sort of a niche fire deck or wanted to play Blacephalon, here is a good or decent option for you. So yeah, I don't really have too much else to say about it. This is Blacephalon. I've wanted to cover it on the channel, but again, it's not something that sees a ton of play. This is kind of the version I think most people are playing it, which is pairing it with Turtonator and then Oricorio as well. It's kind of just a, you know, there's not many honestly strong kind of lead off fire type options in the game. So Oricorio kind of slots in the deck and does its thing. But anyway, here's Blacephalon with Turtonator and Oricorio. Okay, next up, let's talk about Decidueye. I know some people have been asking about Decidueye on the channel ever since the new set released. With Pheromosa, you would think that the new Decidueye, as well as the new Dartrix, right, with the skill link, you know, attack, they're able to hit the bench. You would think that this deck is actually quite strong, and it actually is pretty good. But at the same time, for whatever the reason, I just feel like Decidueye doesn't, it's not like consistent enough. I don't really know how to describe it. This is a deck that, of course, just like most rare candy decks, if you don't end up finding your rare candy or your stage 2 Pokemon, you're kind of a sitting duck and your deck just doesn't really do much. Also against Silvally, like if you're going first, like if you're going first in the format, most decks are bad going first, to be fair. But the thing is in the format is if you're going first and you're playing against Silvally Rampardos, it's very, very difficult to win. And Decidueye is certainly a deck that struggles to go first, right? And that's just the reality of things. And yes, theoretically, we can lead with Pheromosa or Rowlet and do some damage to the bench. But again, if we're going first, it's like you're a turn behind. And this is a deck that does really well going second. It's a little bit inconsistent inherently, but going first, it just kind of doesn't feel very good. And it was the same with the Meowscarada decks of last format. I mean, it's not necessarily a big downside, but I think that if you're playing a deck that is inherently not good going first, you're going to have to make sure that you have a phenomenal matchup against Silvally and Rampardos. And this deck theoretically does have a good matchup against it, but it's really not that great. I don't know how I really feel about Decidueye. I think it's going to be kind of a niche player. I just think it's tough because so many people are playing the Buzzwole grass decks, and it's hard to really justify. It really is. And Meowscarada has kind of fallen mostly out of the format, mainly because of the rise of Rampardos. Rampardos does actually win the head-to-head matchup against Meowscarada, which is a little bit unfortunate, and Rampardos is everywhere right now. But yeah, I think that Decidueye has been upgraded for sure with Pheromosa, so we can kind of play this instead of playing Lurantis like we were last format. And then we have the new skill link Dartrix, which is fairly good. So you can hit for skill dive with Rowlet, and then even just evolve into Dartrix and do, I believe, is this 30? Is it 30 damage to your opponents? Oh, no, it's only 20. Okay. That's probably a decent reason why this deck isn't that good. 10 plus 20 is only 30, so we're not even getting the KO on a fossil by like turn 2 if unless we have like Pheromosa, right? So I don't know. It is what it is. We can utilize the the Leaf Cape, Erica's Lily stuff to just heal a ton. That is somewhat of an upside. We also have the new Decidueye with 130 HP, which can do 70 damage to the bench, but 130 you are getting 1-hit KO'd by Rampardos unless we have a Leaf Cape attached. So yeah, I just, I don't necessarily know what's going on with Decidueye. I think it's kind of too early for us to say, just because most people aren't choosing to play Decidueye, they're choosing to play Buzzwole. I think this deck could be really good. I'm just trying to think of like the scenarios where maybe I would rather play Decidueye and Pheromosa than just play Buzzwole. And it's kind of tough for me to like decide that. I don't really know the positioning of this particular deck and if it'll take over. I do think it has a ton of potential. So whether or not people choose to play it a lot early on doesn't necessarily justify us deciding whether it's good or not. But I think as time goes on, it might be a fairly good niche deck that has decent matchups against a lot of top decks in the format. But it is what it is. I can talk all I want about the positioning of Decidueye because it's so early on and we just don't know yet. But theoretically, it is still a strong deck, and Decidueye is a really strong Pokemon. It's been upgraded by the inclusion of the new Dartrix, the new non-EX Decidueye, and then Pheromosa. Theoretically speaking, we can lead with Pheromosa, and we can rare candy into the small Decidueye, and then just go into the big Decidueye. That's a really strong combo, but again, you're gonna have to draw into the correct cards, so it can be just a little bit tough to kind of get where you want to go. Also, going first feels bad, particularly with this deck, so it is what it is. There's Decidueye. I wanted to cover it because a lot of people have been asking about it. I do think that this is probably the best way to play Decidueye right now, mainly just because Meowscarada is not very good. So I don't know if I would really choose to play Meowscarada right now, but again, we've also gotten all of these new grass cards that are good, like Buzzwole. So we'll see exactly where it comes out in terms of the metagame. Lastly, let's talk about another Silvally deck that people are playing, which is with Charizard. So Silvally can be paired in like a ton of different ways. Like theoretically, it can be played all over the place. But I think that Charizard is actually still pretty good in the format. And I think that it deserves some mention, right? So Charizard is a card that is kind of polarizing in the sense that, 150 is a good number right now. Grass decks are certainly really common. Giratina Darkrai is really common, and Charizard is traditionally a card that is predominantly good against Giratina Darkrai and then good against the grass deck. So theoretically speaking, Charizard should be really well positioned in the format right now. But for whatever the reason, I just think that these rare candy decks are being weeded out a little bit by the fast-paced nature and the consistency of Silvally that can just end up doing 100 damage on its second turn, right? So that's just the overall downside, I think, to the format or just to playing rare candy decks right now is that, if you're going first, you're probably just going to get KO'd on your second turn by Silvally, and you're going to have to deal with that. Charizard is a Pokemon that has to sit in the active spot and then stoke before it can do anything. And that certainly doesn't feel very, very good, especially when we're going first, right? And Silvally pops up on turn 2. So you got to keep that in mind. We are playing Lily, Pokemon Center Lady. We have Giant Cape as well. So theoretically speaking, we should be able to live some attacks even from like a Rampardos, even after like a type null attack. So if we're going second, this deck could be fairly good, just purely off the fact that Silvally definitely doesn't want to go first. And it's just in general a little bit better to do so. But yeah, theoretically speaking, Charizard is really well positioned. So we're actually just pairing it with Silvally and type null. And I don't know if it makes a whole lot of sense to, I guess, like deviate from like the Turtonator package or maybe just deviate from like the combination of Charizard and Incineroar. I don't really know. I think that we're going to see Silvally placed into a variety of different decks in the format, which is maybe a downside. I think that, the metagame in general is defined by, I think, whatever's kind of the best into the field. And the thing with Silvally is that it just isn't bad into anything. It's consistent, it's strong. We're only playing one copy of it in here as well, so it's not like it's really taking up a ton of spots in the deck. Theoretically speaking, there's a lot of scenarios where we maybe never ever really even go into Silvally, but 100 damage is 100 damage, so keep that in mind. This is a list that actually did well in a recent online tournament, so I wanted to include it. It really is just Charizard, and then you kind of pairing it with Silvally and type null instead of like Turtonator and Kiawe. And yeah, I think it's actually pretty good, I'm not gonna lie. We're playing Lily, we're playing Pokemon Center Lady, and we're playing Iono in Pokecom, which I think you kind of have to do when you're playing, a deck like this. So yeah, anyway, there it is, guys. Okay. Now, we've covered a couple of decks that have been doing pretty good and kind of cropped up other really powerful decks that could position themselves into the metagame. But what I want to do is tick quickly at the end of this video. We're going to, of course, do Meta Monday on Monday. But what I wanted to do in this video, particularly at the end here really quickly, is take a look at the metagame that we're seeing from the Ursa Days tournament, which just started like an hour ago. So we don't really have a ton of like metadata, but what we do have is data regarding the decks, right, that people are playing. So if we go to the metagame report for the Ursa Days tournament, this is what the current meta landscape looks like in terms of what the most common decks are, at least going into this weekend, right? So as we see, Silvally and Rampardos, far and away actually the most played deck here with a 20% meta share. That's more than basically every other deck was last format. Now, of course, this is all subject to change. We'll see how the day 2 data is on Monday when this tournament wraps up tomorrow and we cover it on Meta Monday. But yeah, these are the decks that are most common in the format right now, which I just thought was really, really interesting. So we've got Silvally Rampardos as by far the most common deck. I believe there's been, there's only been one round that's completed so far. So that's sort of, keep that in mind. Like the win rates and stuff in this metagame aren't really, this is just after one round of Swiss. So don't really take a look at the win rates or anything like that. It's not super important. Just take a look at the meta shares. So yeah, Silvally Rampardos, really common. Second is Buzzwole Pheromosa. And Buzzwole Pheromosa, I think, is still probably inherently the strongest deck in the game. But the thing with it is that it doesn't even have like that good of a matchup into Silvally Rampardos. It really just comes down to whoever goes second. And unfortunately, that's kind of what the format is right now with Silvally and Rampardos running around. Giratina Darkrai, still a strong option. I do think the fact that you can slot in a bunch of hand disruption is certainly really relevant. One thing to mention as well is that Limitless is splitting up the Buzzwole decks into 2 categories, just for whatever the reason, whether you're running like 2 Pheromosa or not. So it's split up into 2 different, I guess, archetypes for whatever the reason. It's realistically the same deck. So 42 people were playing Buzzwole Celesteela, and then 95 were just playing Buzzwole Pheromosa. They're like the same deck, theoretically, just with like, you know, the Pokemon that you're running being a little different. So if we combine them up, that is fairly close. That ends up being about 15% meta share, which is definitely a little bit more than Silvally Rampardos. So the data seems a bit skewed, but just add these 2 together, and that's kind of where we're looking at. Giratina Darkrai still a really strong option. And like we see here, Solgaleo and Shiinotic, a card that is just super, or I guess a deck that's really randomly popped up here just in the last couple of days, or really in the last day or two. And yeah, actually kind of really the 3rd or 4th, I should say, most played deck of the tournament. Some fire down here. Giratina Magnezone is still really good. And then, of course, Turtonator Charizard, fairly decent. Some people are playing Decidueye. And then Guzzlord. The Guzzlord decks and the Dark-type decks really have fallen off in terms of play. They just aren't necessarily that common. And I think a big reason for that is realistically just because they're not super fast paced, and going first against Silvally with that deck feels, again, really terrible, and grass is everywhere. So having that grass weakness definitely doesn't feel super good. And yeah, so Dark isn't seeing a ton of play right now. And yeah, that kind of seems to be what's at the top of the metagame, at least currently, is definitely Silvally Rampardos, the Buzzwole decks, and then Giratina Darkrai. Solgaleo is definitely like a dark horse. I'm interested to see exactly how it performs this weekend, but I do think it's actually pretty good. Again, the main reason why I wanted to make this video was because it kind of cropped up in the last day or so. So that's really what the core of this video was to showcase this new Solgaleo deck, which I think is actually quite good. And then I think Fire and, of course, Magnezone decks and Giratina is still a good option in the format right now. So here's the metadata from the Ursa Days tournament this weekend. We'll talk a little bit of a bit more about it on Monday, of course, when the tournament wraps up and we have all of the data. But just keep in mind, these are the most common decks of the format right now. Silvally Rampardos is just really consistent, but it's really simple to play. No matter kind of what you draw, you do the same thing every game, which is certainly an upside. The complexity of a deck, or I guess the lack of complexity of a deck, is certainly a valuable factor when you're determining which deck you should play. Minimizing the opportunity to make misplays is certainly really, really important. But like I said, I think that Silvally Rampardos is kind of the front runner right now, and what we're seeing is just people kind of figuring out ways to counter it. And that's really what this early meta is kind of looking like. We'll talk about it more as the days develop, and we'll see exactly what wins the Ursa Days tournament. I'm really, really curious. But yeah, I think that the meta has been shaken up quite a bit, as we see here just from this meta share. I mean, what is this, like? Most of the decks that people are playing right now are new decks, which is actually pretty fun to think about, right? Which is, you know, something that typically happens when sets release, but I know a lot of people thought that this new mini set wasn't like the most incredible thing in the world, but it really has created a variety of incredible decks. Silvally just ends up being super good, and I think that, you know, Silvally's a really good card, but I think the main thing about Silvally is that it just pairs perfectly with Rampardos. And it's a little bit unfortunate, at least for all of the other decks in the format, because Rampardos was still really good last format. But now we have Silvally, which is, you know, a single prize Pokemon that's really consistent, does a ton of damage. So it pairs really well with Rampardos, and we can play Gladion, and we can basically thin Pokemon out of our deck, and we can stall for quite some time until we find our Rampardos. The deck just kind of is really, really good. And I think Rampardos in general is just really strong, and now it has like a perfect partner. So it's a little bit scary for the metagame. Hopefully a solid counter meta develops around, you know, countering Silvally Rampardos. We'll see. Like I said, Buzzwole is good into Silvally Rampardos, but it's, again, not that good if you're not going second. You know what I mean? So it does kind of feel a little bit tough. But anyway, guys, that's the video. We're going to kind of wrap it up there. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Again, stay tuned. We got more videos coming tomorrow. And then, of course, Monday will be Meta Monday. And then Tuesday we'll do our tier lists. So this was sort of a last minute video. I wanted to get this out here just mainly because I think things have actually shifted around a ton just in the last day or two, which is kind of crazy. So yeah, I mean, that's the world of Pokemon Pocket, right? Things are just sort of, you know, all over the place all the time. So, hey. You know, I'm here for it. It's going to be fun. Okay. All right, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. Stay tuned. And yeah.